of some of the key discoveries in the probable cause affidavit, we really knew that there were going to be several components. We knew that there was going to be, to an extent of some kind, that there was going to be some forensic component. We had, of course, inkling that there was going to be digital forensics that was going to be part of it as well. And we knew that the vehicle was also going to be part of this process because it was so integral for police to actually track down Bryan Kohberger. The big surprise to all of us was the fact that DM, one of the surviving roommates inside of the house, saw a figure clad in black walk right past her, wearing a mask covering the nose and the mouth, and leave through the back sliding glass door. That was the big reveal, if you will, of the probable cause affidavit that really nobody saw that coming.
No, nobody did. I mean, especially since the guidance that we were given since the beginning is that all of this took place in the victim's sleep, and that it was just really like two surviving roommates woke up to see the carnage that was left behind. And now you get this information that comes out about a roommate seeing somebody inside of the home, and the chilling details and the way that she was described as effectively being petrified and scared into not being able to move in that moment, really shed some light on, how scary of a situation this was. Naturally, JB, I'm sure that everyone who is watching right now and just about everybody on Twitter is still asking the same question. Why was there that long gap? But speculating at this point doesn't really do much good for anybody. In all likelihood, that roommate is going to have to enter some testimony into this case. That's what you would think, that at some point that roommate, assuming this goes all the way to trial, that roommate would be asked to take the stand at some point, because that is such a key piece of evidence that we have here in this case. So, I mean, it stands to reason that we're going to get all that information at some point. I mean, I think that the thing that I would say is that I think I said this on the show last time. Let's hold off on guessing at, that roommate's mindset and, criticizing that person, for their actions. Because one, I mean, very few of us have ever been in that situation before. We don't know what we would do there. And two, we don't really know the situation surrounding that. I mean, let's let the legal process play out here. Let's see what happens over the coming weeks and coming months before casting judgment, and then see what the actual story and what the actual facts are in this case.
I can't begin. Robert, I don't know if you have as well, but I'll speak to my social media accounts. I have received so many messages. I lost count of how many messages, especially on Instagram, comments on TikTok, people trying to get a hold of me and communicate that being in that moment, how crippling the fear might have been for the surviving roommate, DM. Just Dylan.
Oh, JB, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah,
but I just got a message from Brian Enton, who just got out of the courtroom, and he said that Bryan Kohberger was in court today in an orange T-shirt and told the court he waived his right to a speedy preliminary hearing, no bail.
Okay.
That's the latest guidance we've been given.
Okay, so that's a major development, waiving his right to a speedy preliminary hearing. So is he waiving the right? Oh, no, I'm sorry. He just tweeted out, Bryan Kohberger's preliminary hearing has been set for June 26th at 9 a.m., waiving his right to a speedy preliminary hearing. My goodness. I mean, that is waiving your right to a speedy preliminary hearing is something, but that is 6 months.
That's
right?
6 months. That's 6 months. And, I mean, with a preliminary hearing coming, I mean, that's when we're going to learn some more of these details and more than likely have some of these burning questions answered. But I mean, that's 6 months from now. That's a long time. That's a long time. And especially considering, I mean, of course, justice for the victims is always, the number one priority here. And, informing the public of what had happened, that's way down the totem pole in terms of priorities. but that is a long time for that community of Moscow, Idaho, to know, exactly what happened in their community. A long time for these victims, for these victims' families, in order to get more information in this case and to see the legal process carry out. I mean, you think about the fact that this all happened in mid-November, and we're looking at the summer of the following year as when this is going to be a preliminary hearing, and that's just the preliminary hearing, a long, drawn-out process.
Long. I'm always first mind, always thinking about the victims. First thing that pops into my brain, and the victims' families in this regard, and to wait 6 months for a preliminary hearing. We were talking. People were asking. One of the comments earlier was when we were going to have, the beginning of a trial, and when the actual trial process was going to get underway, and just a 6 month delay that catches me by surprise. Robert, does it catch you by surprise as well?
I mean, it's a little bit hard to say, because I mean, it's all about strategy here. I mean, I think that I expected,
and not to interrupt you, this is mutually agreed upon, as I understand it. So, both of these sides came to this date. You have to wonder if one of the sides wanted this to be even beyond 6 months, and this was the compromise. We'll
potentially
find out more in a minute.
I'm sure that we will. I'm sure that we're going to be getting more information in just a couple of minutes here. But I mean, as we've said before, every defendant is entitled to a right to their best defense. And if the public attorney and the public defense counsel who was appointed to Brian Kohberger felt so that this was the best strategy for them, they're absolutely going to advocate for it. And that's part of the legal system here.
What does everybody think? We're going to spotlight some #KJB comments. What do you think of the preliminary hearing? Again, the preliminary hearing where you might, of course, get new evidence. You might, of course, get witness testimony. It is setting the stage for the trial in and of itself. What do you think of the preliminary hearing being scheduled for approximately 6 months from now, that being June 26th in Idaho? Hold on, I'm getting an alert. Okay, stand by. All right, sorry, folks. I was just being communicated to in my ear that there will be feeds coming down here momentarily. Robert, if you can kind of take things over here for a second as I talk with our feeds folks. Lawyers need to prepare for the trial, but 6 months is too long. I think a lot of folks are saying that online at the moment.
Right. And again, it's all going to come back to, how does this process carry forward? And I understand, a lot of people feeling that way here, but I mean, there are, criminal cases, which last years in the legal system. I mean, it's not totally uncommon for something like this to happen. And again, it's which factor is the most important here? Because there's several that you do have to weigh here. I mean, there are a lot of people who want justice swiftly. I mean, that's something that has to be considered. The public has a right to know and to be informed at some point. That's something to be considered. But it's also due process for a defendant. That's something that has to be considered. So how do you weigh all of these different factors here is in many cases how all of this ends up shaking out. And, exactly, we're going to learn momentarily exactly how this date was arrived upon and what the back and forth was like in the courtroom as the folks over there figure out, the feed situation. But I mean, surely we're going to be getting more information on this rather momentarily. I mean, there's just a lot to consider. There's a lot to consider in any one of these processes.
Yep.
And, as we get forward here over the next few months, I mean, surely that's going to be tough for these families in order to think about, how long it's going to take for them to serve justice. But I mean, you look on the other hand as well, Brian Kohberger is not being offered bail. So I mean, he's going to be sitting in jail for those 6 months, waiting for this case to come up as well. So I mean, this is going to be a long time. This is going to be long and drawn out until we get to that preliminary hearing process.
We are moments away from the feed coming in. I actually tapped into a second feed that might come in first here in the Stream Center. So monitoring 2 separate feeds coming through on different technologies. The moment it's available, we're going to have it here live in the WFLA Now Stream Center. So we're going to be monitoring your comments here as we have Robert Sherman joining us from News Nation. Afterwards, we're going to be answering some questions, but Some of the things that, of course, people are going to be looking for: demeanor, body language, just overall the conversation on how June 26th was selected as the date. And I believe now we do have the feed coming in. Let's listen in live from Idaho. Apologies, not live. Again, let me make this clear. This feed is coming in live, but this is the court hearing that took place a short time ago. And it would appear that they are preparing to play it back, and they did play it back, and something didn't operate correctly. So you're looking here at the screen that they're using to feed that back. So quite literally, we are waiting on somebody to hit the play button. And they also might have stopped because, and this is what will happen so oftentimes with live feeds, is somebody says that they're not ready, that they're not recording. This is, in all likelihood, a pool feed. So all media outlets across the country have to be ready for them to receive this feed. And so they might have hit pause, a little bit of behind the scenes as to what's going on. And now it appears that they are trying to play it back. And here it is. This was moments ago in Idaho. And again, appears some difficulties with the feed. This is going out to all stations right now. So all outlets. So if you're watching on a different live stream, you'll be seeing the same exact screen. No audio on this feed just yet. They will likely turn on audio once the court hearing begins. This was moments ago in Idaho, the status hearing for Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger.
Right, good morning. We are on the record. This is cause number CR 29222805. This is State of Idaho versus Bryan Kohberger. Mr. Kohberger is in custody. He is appearing here in court with his attorneys, Ms. Taylor, Mr. Logsdon, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jennings appearing on behalf of the state. This is the time set in the matter for the preliminary hearing status conference. So I am going to inquire of counsel. Ms. Taylor, what's the status at this time?
Thank you, Your Honor. We are going to ask the court to set preliminary hearing out into June. We would request the 3rd or 4th week of June and probably 4 or 5 days for preliminary hearing. Mr. Kohberger understands his right to a timely preliminary hearing, and he's willing to waive the timeliness to allow us time to obtain discovery in this case and be prepared.
And Mr. Thompson, are you in agreement with that?
The state has no objection to that, Your Honor. Ms. Taylor reached out to us by email yesterday with her proposal. On reflection, the state's calendar would be better in the month of July, but we will make the end of June work if that's the court's preference. And I haven't had a chance to talk to Ms. Taylor about that. I'm sorry, I know that's last minute.
That's okay. The court's calendar is going to be better towards the end of June, early July. So would that work, Ms. Taylor, for your scheduling on your other matters?
Your Honor, yes. If we take that 4th week in June, that's actually best.
Okay. So, Mr. Koberger, I need to speak to you for a moment then. Sir, you do understand, and Ms. Taylor has represented here, that she's advised you of your right to have, or fully discussed with you, the right that you have, which is to have your preliminary hearing within 14 days of the date that you initially appeared before this court. As you recall, when I advised you of your rights, that hearing is a probable cause hearing, where the state has to establish that more likely than not, these felony offenses were committed and you were the one that committed the felony offenses. If you waive your right to a speedy preliminary hearing, it does not mean that you're giving up your right to have a preliminary hearing. It simply means that you would not be able to come back and challenge that the state did not present probable cause within 14 days. Do you understand?
Yes.
Have you had enough time to speak with Ms. Taylor about your decision to waive your right to a speedy preliminary hearing?
Yes.
Do you need any additional time to do so?
No.
Then I will ask at this time, as to the 5 counts, felony counts that were charged in the criminal complaint that was filed on December 29th of 2022, are you waiving your right to a speedy preliminary hearing and agreeing that that hearing can be held outside the 14-day period?
Yes.
And Ms. Taylor, do you concur with his waiver?
I do, Your Honor. Thank you.
I will find your waiver of speedy preliminary hearing is knowing, intelligently, voluntarily entered here in open court with the assistance of counsel. We will go ahead and set the matter for a preliminary hearing. Monday, June 26th at 9:00 a.m. And I will go ahead and reserve the week, so June 26th to June 30th, in the event that we need all 5 days for presentation of evidence. And just so council knows, it will begin at 9 a.m. each of those days. Is there anything further to address at this time in the case, Mr. Thompson?
Not from the state's perspective, Your Honor, no.
All right. Or Ms. Taylor?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Koberger, then you will be remanded into custody on your same no bail at this point in time, pending further proceedings. Again, we'll send notice out to council, and we will be in recess for this morning.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Breaking news on WFLA Now. Here's JB Buno.
The preliminary hearing for Idaho murder suspect Brian Koberger set for June 26th. Koberger making his second appearance in Idaho court, answering to the charges of murdering the 4 University of Idaho students. Hello there, folks. JB here with you live on WFLA Now. Let's bring back Robert Sherman. I'm just going to get right to our comment section. And our comment section is lighting up with one comment in particular, noting some of the cuts that are on Brian Koberger's face. I would say somewhere between 60-70% of our comments are all about some of the markings that he has right here next to his lip, and right there on the jawline as well. He looks to me, Robert, to be relatively clean shaven as far as his second appearance, ahead of his second appearance in Idaho court. So I'm looking at this as potentially maybe shaving cuts, but all our comment section is talking about right now are some of the markings on his face.
Yeah, and again, it's a who knows right now kind of situation. I mean, this case is being played so closely to the vest that we really have no idea what's going on here. And I mean, it could be nothing, as you said, JB. I mean, it could just be shaving cuts. I mean, it could be something more significant than that. I mean, who knows at this point? But I mean, it's just another piece of ammunition for the speculation mill, shall we say? I mean, looking at that status here that we just had here, I mean, it was kind of, as we talked about, it could be pretty point blank, open and shut, what this was. I mean, you even heard from the Latah County prosecutor, Bill Thompson, who said they had no objections to this date. They had some amicable correspondence with Koberger's legal counsel beforehand in order to set this date. So, I mean, everybody was fine with this. I mean, there was really no us versus them kind of dynamic here. And I know that, I mean, I'm already starting to get some people reaching out to me, who are frustrated, by like how long this is going to take until we have this preliminary hearing. But I mean, this is how this goes. This is how this situation tends to play out sometimes. And we're all just going to have to wait until June in order until we start to get some of the more details on this case.
For those of you just joining us that missed some of the conversation before this live stream or before the court feed became accessible to us, we're going to have an afternoon stream today on WFLA Now specifically about the legalities going forward. I have now a myriad of questions to ask to Peter Tragos, our special guest, the lawyer who will be here physically with me in the WFLA Now Stream Center, and really the entirety of that live stream coming up in a few hours on WFLA Now across all platforms will be just to answer your questions. I mean, that's really all we're going to be doing. We're going to be answering as many of your questions going through YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Twitter as well, rapid fire, so that we have a conversation about where things stand now with this preliminary hearing set for June 26th, again, in Idaho. Again, Robert Sherman, JB Buno here with you live. So, okay, the scratches on the face, that, of course, is the big thing that people are talking about in our comments. Look, if there was anything that had happened while Brian Koberger was in custody, something outside of the shaving cut scenario, we likely would have been told about it from Idaho police, Idaho authorities in general, and we have not heard of anything happening behind the scenes as far as his time in custody, again, after his extradition back to Idaho from Pennsylvania. So let's keep things focused here on the actual, the headline itself, that his preliminary hearing is set for June 26th in Idaho. Let's talk about the meaning behind that. Robert, there's now a ton of time, 6 months, for more evidence to be discovered, for there to be forensics that comes back, examinations on the Hyundai Elantra, examinations of some of the evidence that was quite literally taken out of the college residents, the Kings Road residents, just really in the last couple of weeks. All of this time now for both sides to prepare. It's not just Koberger and his defense to prepare their defense now that they have the probable cause affidavit. It also gives time for more tips to come in. There's a lot of time now for both sides to really set the stage for what will be, I mean, to say the least, with all the time that's going to elapse, a highly anticipated preliminary hearing on June 26th.
Right. And it's, as you mentioned, it's more time for the prosecution in order to find, the facts that they're looking for and the evidence that they're looking for in order to get a conviction. But it also gives the defense opportunity to put together their defense in a way and to potentially find new facts to this case that aids the defense of Brian Koberger as well. I mean, everything is strategy here. I mean, effectively what you've looked at is Brian Koberger has waived his right to a speedy trial. You even heard the judge say theirs is that the prosecution had 14 days to show that they had probable cause in this case. He's waived that right there. So an exception has been granted, that strays from the norm a bit, shall we say. There's a reason for that. There's surely a reason that the defense has asked for an exception. There's surely a reason that the defense has asked for all this to take place. Again, I don't mean to overstate my credentials here. I do not have a JD. I am not an attorney. I've sat in on a number of these cases before, and all I can tell you is that everything is done for a reason, and everything is done meticulously. And I'm surely we're going to be getting more information about that. But I mean, you're looking at a June timeline. until you start to get some of these questions answered here in this case. And, I mean, you look at this gag order that has been in place, that's going to be a long time in order to hold over this gag order from both sides. Nobody's allowed to talk about the case. It's going to be a long time until a lot of people are going to get the answers that they're looking for here. Talking to some people in the Moscow community, we were just talking to them the other day. I mean, there's a lot of people who really want to know what happened in this case, largely because, I mean, this is really, the biggest homicide that's really happened in their lives. And for the first time, I mean, these people are telling us that they're locking their doors in Moscow. They're afraid to walk around town, for the first time in their lives. So, I mean, they do have stake in this game. I mean, this is, for the people of Moscow, Idaho, that gets more than, the curiosity of the case. I mean, people want to know what happened in their community, and they have a right to know that. But of course, as we said before, there are multiple things that you have to weigh here. And one of the most paramount things you have to weigh is the due process for the defense. And that's what we're getting here.
Let's, some people are making note of his voice. He did respond to the judge, of course, when asked by the judge if he was in fact agreeing to his to waiving the right to a speedy trial. And then, of course, some of the folks noting that he was not in handcuffs as well. Look, that is done. Everything here is done per court procedure. So if he's not in handcuffs, that is because that is the policy and the procedure based, of course, on what's going on there with the with Idaho court procedures. So others making note of that as well. Let's go to some of the comments on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live. If you use hashtag HeyJB, if you use hashtag HeyRobert for Robert Sherman, we can answer some of your questions while we're here live on WFLA Now. Or maybe you have, how often do we get just amazing observations from some of our commenters who point out something? Feel free to either point out something, I want to point out this comment from Black Rose, hashtag HeyJB. Do you think that they will find the knife? We haven't talked about that on this live stream. Let's still point out that the murder weapon itself has not been recovered. The sheath has been recovered, and the sheath might be the most important piece of evidence in the case so far for prosecutors, because on the button of that sheath was a blood sample that they were able to use to establish forensics that pointed them and confirmed with, and I'll go, where's the probable cause affidavit? On the very last page, I want to make sure I get the number of 9s right here, Robert. At least 99.9998 of the male population would be expected to be excluded from this possibility of being the suspect's biological father. So again, genetic genealogy being used. But yeah, as of right now, there is no murder weapon. And that also, too, we're talking about June 26th. That gives investigators a period of half a year, roughly half a year, to find the murder weapon. But when we're talking about all the time that elapsed in the aftermath of November 13th and all of the geography that was all the many, many states between Idaho and Pennsylvania, there's just endless, quite literally endless possibilities for what happened to the potential murder weapon in this case, Robert.
Right. And you brought up that number, more than 99.9%. I mean, as somebody who's sat in these trials before, all that I heard there was not 100%. That's what the defense is going to say. That's going to be the point that the defense takes, in order to try and really belittle some of the evidence that the prosecution has gathered. Now, as we've said before, making the distinction here, to get a conviction in a case like this, the jury does not need to be 100% certain. Needs to be beyond reasonable doubt. Put that in the territory of like 90 to 95% sure that that's what happened here. So maybe the DNA paired with these other pieces of evidence that are here is enough. But I mean, you've got 6 months here, if you're the defense, in order to try and prove that DNA, that there's a rational reason why there would be this DNA in the home, if it is, the DNA, and there hasn't been a mismatch, or to give some rational reason as to why his cell phone pinged in the area 12 times beforehand. I mean, those are going to be the things, that right now, these are hard to answer. But keep in mind, you've only heard from the prosecution. You've not heard from the defense. The defense has not made the defense has not been given the opportunity to respond to any of this and explain why his cell phone pinged 12 times in the months leading up to the murder, or why there was a knife sheath with his DNA inside of that home. We haven't heard from the defense yet. All that we've heard really is Brian Koberg saying in a jail when asked why he did it, he said, "I didn't do anything."
Also,
That's what we've had.
I honed in and I got some messages on Instagram, people who were thanking me for bringing up the idea of the cell phone pinging being this, the smoking gun evidence, because we don't know the size of the ping range. We don't know if he was, how precise those pings are. They say that he went back. Okay, but how the cell phone triangulation, pinpointing his location, how pinpointed exactly is it? If anybody has found, I have looked, but if anybody has found any reports or any experts, that is something that I'm going to look into, finding an expert who can talk to just how specific those cell phone pings are. I mean, can you ping somebody down with the cell tower and the cell technology that was being used in this case specifically? I'm talking about the make of phone. I'm talking about the amount of towers, because cell tower triangulation and pinpointing someone's location, it comes down to the volume of towers. It comes down to a lot of different factors. So just how pinpointed was it is something that I really, really want to know, because I think it's a massive part of this case. I want to get to Mac Trucker Girl. This comment's been on screen for a minute or two. #HJB. We don't actually know if they don't have the actual knife at this point. They may have it by now. And this is entirely true. I mean, you would imagine that, given the law enforcement sources that have been speaking on this story, you would imagine that if they had the knife, that might make it out to the media and maybe make it out to one of the reporters covering this story. However, with the gag order and with the way that things currently stand, as now both sides are getting prepared for trial, we just don't know if they have the actual knife. It's very possible, it's somewhat possible, I should say, that it was discovered somewhat recently, but we really have very little way of knowing.
And I mean, to that commenter's point, I mean, you look at what our disposition towards this case was the day before that affidavit came out and the day after the affidavit came out. So much of that information was kept from the public exceptionally well. I mean, oftentimes you get some degree of leaking, from law enforcement, and I mean, they kept that really buttoned up from the way that we had no idea that they had a knife sheath. We had heard rumblings that there was a DNA match, but I mean, nothing more than that. We had no idea that there was an eyewitness that was inside of that home. We had no idea that, we had, a consistent number of cell phone pings in the area. We had an idea that the car was important, but then we were told that the car wasn't important. And then, we just took it for what it was. So, I mean, law enforcement has done a pretty good job of keeping all this close to the vest. One thing that I would say, you made the comment about the ping range, on cell phones earlier.
Yep.
I mean, I think I want the viewers to keep in mind as well is that the distance between Pullman, Washington, and Moscow, Idaho, is not even the distance between Orlando and Tampa. It's not even the distance between Fort Worth and Dallas. I mean, it's 8 miles. And people go back and forth between those towns all the time. So I mean, you look at defenses that are going to come up. I mean, it's not as if there's no reason for Brian Koberger to be in Moscow, Idaho. I mean, they're so close to one another, and people do make those journeys. I mean, we met students at Washington State who go to fraternity parties in Idaho, and we met students at the University of Idaho who go to bars in Pullman, Washington, and hang out with Washington State people. These two communities are really symbiotic from that standpoint. So I mean, there's a lot to keep in mind there. It's not as out of place as one might think.
Yeah, and as far as the technology that was used to ping the phone, we know now. I mean, I don't know if you use it, Robert. I use it with some family and friends, like Find My Friends. And you can and when you load up Find My Friends, it will kind of show you a big circle and then it'll shrink down to like a medium circle, and then once it really figures out where the person is, it'll kind of give you a really, really accurate, pinpointed location as to where somebody is. But as I understand it, and I've done reports on this, as I understand it, that is GPS technology, and GPS technology and cellular tracking via cell tower, they're completely different. They're different technologies used to track somebody. And I just want to know more specifics as to, there's also the Wi-Fi component. I mean, hitting on the Wi-Fi. So, look, if you hit on the Wi-Fi, what is today's Wi-Fi range? When I launch my cell phone and I look at available Wi-Fi networks, sometimes I'll get the coffee shop located across the street, or even way larger, or way farther than that. So, there's a lot of questions to be asked specifically about the digital forensics. And you know what? We have a lot of time to talk about it, because we got 6 months now between now and June 26th. We're going to spend another approximately 10 minutes with Robert Sherman, if that's okay with you, Robert.
Perfect.
Again, why don't you really quickly, just tell people where you're joining us from and what you're working on for News Nation while I get to some of the other comments coming in.
Right now, I'm actually in McAllen, Texas, and we've been focusing on the U.S.-Mexico border and trying to go inside some of the human smuggling operations that have been happening down here. So we had a exclusive ride along with Texas State Troopers last night, which was the wildest car ride of my life, going on high-speed chases, pursuing some of these smugglers here in this region. And that's going to be on News Nation tonight at 5 and 6 o'clock Eastern time. So hope you'll join us for that. It's some pretty intense things that we saw down here.
Robert doing us a kindness, hopping on stream with me, because he's covering a lot of different stories as we speak. And with Brian Enton, of course, doing his work for News Nation and being physically in the courtroom, he was unavailable to join us on this live stream. I talked to Brian last night. It was just a little bit too difficult for him to, when we do these live streams, and Brian knows this, as I'm sure Robert does by now, it's usually long form. And so Brian could have maybe hopped on for a minute or two, but it would have been really tight. And I just said, you know what, Brian, just worry about News Nation. And that's why I called up Robert, who I knew was not in Idaho anymore, but he was right, kind enough to respond and hop on stream with us. So let's make the most out of these next 10 minutes and look at some of the comments that are coming in. We don't, I haven't followed. This is a great question. Caitlin Sweeney wants to know, #KJB, were any family members there? Were any family members in the courtroom? I would imagine this to be extraordinarily likely. I've not seen any reports yet. Robert, have you? We can look on Twitter for some of the reporters that were in the courtroom as to whether or not, the Gonzalez family was there, or any of the other families were represented.
I have not heard anything yet. I'm taking a look for that now to see if Brian sent out any notes on that. I haven't seen anything about that yet. That's a great question. I mean, I know for some of these families, it's been very hard throughout this process, as you can imagine, to be involved in any way. Other families have wanted to be there every step of the way. Hard to know. Hard to know. I'm sure we'll find out soon.
Yeah, and also seeing here, Steve Gonzalez's comments that, excuse me, that there was a Wi-Fi hit. I do see that. I don't know the source of that information, but I'm getting a lot of people sending me that Steve said that there was a Wi-Fi hit